ghosts. Not really. Sure, I'd heard the stories and seen the movies, but the idea of a spirit clinging to this world, trapped in a dilapidated old house, always seemed too far-fetched. That was until I spent the night at the Holloway Mansion. The Holloway Mansion stood at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, its windows dark and lifeless. It had been abandoned for years, ever since the last of the Holloway family died under mysterious circumstances. The local kids used to dare each other to spend the night there, but I was the first to actually take up the challenge. At 22, I thought I was above such childish fears. I arrived just as the sun was setting, casting a blood-red glow over the decaying structure. The wind whistled through the cracked windows, and the air smelled of damp wood and mold. The front door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing a grand foyer, its former beauty marred by neglect. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, and cobwebs draped from the chandelier like ghostly veils. I set my backpack down on the floor and took out my flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. I could almost hear the echoes of the house's former inhabitants, the soft rustle of silk dresses, the distant murmur of voices, and the crackling of a fire long since extinguished. But there was nothing now, just silence. I walked through the foyer and into the parlor, where a massive fireplace dominated the room. Above it hung a portrait of a stern-looking man, his eyes following me as I moved. I couldn't help but feel a chill as I stared back at him, as though he was silently judging me for trespassing in his home. I shook off the feeling and made my way upstairs. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, and I half expected them to give way beneath me. But they held, and I soon found myself on the second floor, where the bedrooms were located. Most of the doors were closed, but one stood slightly ajar at the end of the hall. I hesitated before approaching it, my flashlight flickering as though sensing my unease. I pushed the door open, revealing a small bedroom. A single bed sat against the wall, its mattress stained and sagging. The wallpaper here was torn and faded, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. I decided this would be as good a place as any to set up camp. I laid out my sleeping bag on the floor, sat down, and pulled out a book to pass the time. As I read, the wind outside picked up, howling through the cracks in the walls and rattling the windows. I tried to focus on the words in front of me, but my mind kept wandering, imagining things moving in the shadows just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Hours passed, and eventually, I decided to try and get some sleep. I turned off the flashlight and crawled into my sleeping bag, pulling it up to my chin. The house seemed to grow even quieter, the only sound the beating of my heart, loud and insistent in the darkness. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but something kept nagging at me, a feeling of being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination, the result of too many ghost stories. But then I heard it, a soft, barely audible whisper. My eyes snapped open, and I sat up, straining to hear. The whisper came again, this time louder, but I couldn't make out the words. It was like someone was speaking just beyond the door, their voice muffled by the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, the beam revealing nothing but the empty room. I swallowed hard and forced myself to get up. My legs felt like lead as I made my way to the door. The whispering stopped the moment I stepped into the hallway, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I scanned the hallway with my flashlight, but everything was still. I was about to go back to the room when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, darker than the others, standing at the far end of the hall. My breath caught in my throat as the shadow began to move, slowly at first, then quicker, gliding along the wall toward me. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away. The shadow stopped just a few feet from me, and I could make out its shape, tall, gaunt, with long arms that seemed to stretch impossibly far. Its face, if it had one, was hidden in the darkness, but I could feel its gaze boring into me. For what felt like an eternity, we stood there, neither of us moving. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow retreated, slipping into one of the closed rooms. I stood there, shaking, my mind racing. Every instinct told me to get out, to run as fast as I could, and never look back. But something else, some twisted sense of curiosity or bravado, compelled me to follow. I crept down the hallway, my flashlight flickering again, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I stopped in front of the door the shadow had vanished into and placed my hand on the knob. It was cold, almost freezing, and I had to steel myself before turning it. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a room identical to the one I'd left, except for one thing: the figure standing in the corner, facing the wall. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized it was the man from the portrait. His back turned to me, his head bowed as if in prayer. I took a step back, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The man's head snapped up, and slowly he began to turn around. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe as his face came into view, eyes sunken and hollow, mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. He took a step toward me, and that was all it took. I turned and bolted down the hallway, not caring about the noise I was making. The house seemed to close in around me, the walls narrowing as I ran. I could hear footsteps behind me, heavy and deliberate, keeping pace no matter how fast I went. I burst out of the room, nearly tripping over my sleeping bag in my frantic dash to the stairs. I didn't dare look back as I descended, the old wood splintering beneath my feet. My flashlight slipped from my grasp, clattering down the stairs and plunging me into darkness. I stumbled into the foyer, the front door just a few steps away. I could still hear the footsteps, closer now, echoing through the house. I reached the door and yanked it open, the cool night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I didn't stop running until I was back at my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I never looked back at the house as I drove away, the mansion looming in my rearview mirror like a dark sentinel. The footsteps still echo in my mind, a constant reminder of what I saw, or what saw me, in the Holloway Mansion. I haven't slept well since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see that shadow, feel that cold gaze on the back of my neck. I don't know what it was or what it wanted, but I do know one thing. The Holloway Mansion is not just an old house. It's a tomb, and whatever lies within is far from resting in peace.